Studio, Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Perry, for joining us. Well, let's address the diplomatic front because it is packed, and let's begin with the northern front because it seems to be, to an extent, a mirror image of what we're seeing in the south, in the sense that if military first in the south, diplomacy later. In the north, it seems to be the other way around. First, some sort of a diplomatic in-between solution, and no one is ruling out the military option right after.
Well, unlike the South, Israel does not wish to eradicate Hezbollah. At least it's not prepared to pay the price of any such thing. I mean, I'm sure it would be a good idea in theory, but they're not going to, actually try to do that themselves. And so I think they're wise to do diplomacy first and to have the moral high ground where they're asking the UN to implement or to bring about the implementation of its own resolution, 1701, from whatever it was, 16, 17 years ago. A reasonable resolution if you accept that Hezbollah is not Lebanon.
Yeah.
In other words, Israel is happy to have the Lebanese army be on the border. That's why the idea of having the IDF withdrawal is a false equivalence and complete nonsense. Hezbollah is a terrorist group that is a clear and present danger to people a mile or two away across the border.
And this is why the question is, no matter what diplomatic frameworks we're talking about, in the moment of truth, will Hezbollah adhere to the instructions from the nearly non-existent Lebanese government or the orders coming out of Tehran?
They don't have a president. They don't have a head of the army in Lebanon.
Yeah.
You have to build the landscape that would enable them to feel pressure, but I think it's a reasonable goal to try to build that landscape and to create pressure on them. By the way, I would be a little bit worried about their announcement that they lost 100 fighters. Mm-hmm. Because Hezbollah is not in the business of making sure that there's a free and comprehensive and transparent flow of information.
Yeah,
that's not what they're about.
No.
So when they atypically announce such a thing, it kind of sounds to me like they're trying to potentially build a narrative where they've been provoked and they have to strike back and this sort of thing.
In Lebanon and internationally. Let's speak about another perhaps not too typical, or yet giving it another thought, very typical move coming out of Moscow today. The Deputy Foreign Minister Bogdanov is picking up the phone and telling Hamas leaders who are willing to listen that they should release all Israeli hostages now, and that comes after less than a day after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke with President Putin over the phone.
I think this is part and parcel of Russia's effort to remove itself from the zone of being a complete and total global pariah and try to be useful somehow. I mean, it's not like Russia wants Hamas to win or Russia wants hostages to be held. Russia wants Ukraine, or a large part of Ukraine. And there is, in recent weeks, as the Ukrainian counteroffensive stumbles, a lot more talk about how Ukraine needs to sue for peace and be done with it. I think one outcome for Russia that is good in the Ukraine war is for Ukraine to cede more territory, to give them a victory narrative, at least at this point. And for that to happen, they need to be seen as legitimate.
Right.
Now, what could increase their legitimacy more than Putin traveling to the UAE, than Bogdanov calling on Hamas to release hostages? It's almost like they were a normal country run by an acceptable government.
As if they were Qatar.
Playing both sides against each other, of course.
Mastering this.
Yes, birds of a feather.
Let's jump back to the Gaza Strip, or rather the day after what is currently happening in the Gaza Strip. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is talking about what should be happening there, saying that no matter how you look at it, the two-state solution is still the only feasible solution that exists. Let's take a quick listen.
The suffering of the Palestinian civil society in Gaza depresses us. Humanitarian aid for civilians must improve. The Dutch Prime Minister and I are convinced that the two-state solution is the only way in the medium term for Israelis and Palestinians to live together in peace.
Yeah, and if anyone is giving a fight to U.S. President Biden in terms of the support of Israel, it's Scholz. Not that there should be a competition in this respect, but without a doubt, supporting Israel Israel, supporting the Israeli cause, supporting the objectives of the war, and yet saying we do need to think ahead and
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is part of the meta narrative, where to support Israel is precisely, in my view, indeed, to support a two-state solution. I'm not saying Israel can withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza, or in West Bank and also Gaza immediately, but in terms of its ultimate strategic goal, I mean, you have 15 million people between the so-called river and the actual
the
city.
mountain and the beach is
Yes.
one notable
Equally
protest.
divided between Arabs and Jews. Either one side dominates the other or expels the other, or you have an effort to have a truly binational state that's not a Jewish state, and many Jews will flee such a state. Or you have partition. There is no other way in the Euclidean universe. So an Israel that thinks about the future would be trying to position itself that way. And I would add, even right now, as we speak, it's in Israel's interest to not be forced to end the war on Hamas before Hamas is truly gone from Gaza, as it did in every single other cycle, because the destruction in Gaza got too great. If Israel wishes to enable that legitimacy to exist, it needs to articulate a day after plan. And of course, here we see again a misalignment between the interests of the country and that of the current prime minister, who wishes for the war, for some sort of conflict to continue ad infinitum. That's what preserves him in his seat.
Well, the issue of the West Bank is taking center stage once again, because it's not very often in Israel that the prime minister and the military want one thing and that the security cabinet decides another. But this is exactly what happened when it rejected a push to return Palestinian workers from the West Bank to jobs in proper. Senior correspondent Owen Alterman explains the reasons behind this move.
Once upon a time, in an October 6th world, this was the Erez Crossing, the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, with Palestinian traders and workers lining up to cross into Israel to do business or earn a living. But this is an October 7th world. And in that world, the Israeli Security Cabinet Sunday night rejected a move to return even West Bank Palestinian workers to building sites and farms inside Israel.
Part of the security establishment a view of what could reduce the tension is to let them work. The security cabinet begs to differ.
Security establishment is generally very practical, which is why it's no fan of never-ending occupation, by the way. But the cabinet is political, and politically right now, the Israeli people don't want Palestinian workers. They want separation, which indeed aligns with the overall strategic goal of partition. And of course, it doesn't help that there were reports that much of the intelligence that was possessed by the Hamas invaders on October 7th came from workers that were very friendly and very nice, and then went back and perhaps under duress delivered information about the landscape.
And perhaps not. Perhaps willingly cooperated.
Or perhaps willingly.
Yeah, this is also a very feasible option now, knowing the level of support for Hamas and its ideology. But let's go back to the future. There is a generation growing up here that will not be too supportive of a two-state solution. They would rather the river, from the river to the sea, state of mind.
I'm not so sure that's true. I don't think they're thinking very deeply. It's sad when older people disdain the younger generation. I don't want to be that person, but something happened that's sort of global historic, which is that the younger generation gets their information from 20-second videos on social media. This does not foster critical thinking. It doesn't create an understanding of historical context and precedent. It doesn't make you particularly deep or moral or anything but reactive to stimuli. And that's the situation we have, and it's informing, of course, the wokeness in America, which doesn't help Israel, and also to a degree in Europe, and it's radicalizing the youth here. But part of it, of course, comes back to Israel. I mean, Israel's, other than a brief respite, presented a government to the world that did not provide the Arabs with anything resembling a horizon since 2009. And right now, Israel's doing nothing to explain. I'm very sad to say, nothing to explain its actions in Gaza. It's only very general. It's only trust us. It's we know what we're doing. They're not saying we bombed this building in this area for this particular reason. You have to try a bit harder.
We do see the idea of a spokesperson facing the cameras day in, day out to explain or to try and give the bigger picture of IDF actions. It seems
it's generalities. They're not saying this is why we attacked in this part of Sajaiya. They're not really doing it. I know what it means to be persuasive. I know what it means to be persuaded. Okay? If I wasn't inclined a priori to believe Israel's probably trying to indeed do what it says, which is minimize civilian casualties, I would not be persuaded, and neither would you, and neither would the viewers. They're not doing it correctly. And the flip side of that is they're not providing a day after horizon or any way out. Because the world sees what's happening here, and they conclude that Israel is prepared to flatten Sajaiya and Khan Yunis and risk its own hostages along the way, where there is an alternative to provide a way out, not to speak of eternal occupation of Gaza for the security reason and to risk an insurgency ad infinitum, and perhaps to offer the Hamas a deal where they get out and disarm in exchange for something. It would look like a more reasonable perspective if you said we're willing to end the war on these conditions. Israel doesn't even do that, not convincingly, not systematically, not in any way that is eloquent and charismatic and persuasive.
And yet, to end this war, there's always this option that we rarely talk about, that Hamas simply lay down the arms, release the hostages, and the war will end.
Well, I'm not naive enough to think they're going to do that, but there could be pressure brought to bear on them.